Islamic Cleric has threatened to declare a war if Nigeria is not divided. He stated that the Igbos should leave Nigeria and go and form their own country. A new Islamic Cleric has publicly demanded the division of Nigeria, following similar statements made by another cleric a few months ago. The cleric threatens war if Nigeria is not divided, using derogatory language against other ethnic groups. Despite the open threat, Nigerian security agencies like the Department of State Services, DSS, and police have not taken any action against him. The cleric claims that his people are being killed by other ethnic groups, which some critics refutes as baseless. A critic agrees that Nigeria is failing as a country, but criticizes the way division is being advocated, particularly with hate and animosity. A small group of powerful individuals, referred to as the Cabal, allegedly profits from Nigeria's corruption, insecurity and instability, resisting any attempt at change. The critic argues that discussing Nigeria's division should not be criminalized and advocates for a referendum rather than war. He claims that Nigeria was never meant to be a true nation, but was created for colonial administrative convenience and resource exploitation. He criticizes the Nigerian government for enabling foreign invasions and preventing locals from defending themselves while suppressing dissent. He suggests that many ethnic groups in Nigeria are frustrated with the current state of the nation and may eventually push for separation. I want to share a story with you. A story that has been making rounds in the news, and one that has left me both troubled and reflective. It all began when an Islamic cleric declared quite boldly that if Nigeria is not divided, he and his followers will declare war. Even more shockingly, he insisted that the Igbos, one of Nigeria's major ethnic groups, should leave Nigeria and go form their own country. When I first heard these words, I couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and deep sadness. I sat down with my morning cup of tea and kept replaying his message in my mind, trying to understand what had driven him to make such a provocative statement. I've always been fascinated by the way people express their frustrations, especially when it comes to the issues that cut deep in our society. You see, Nigeria is a country of many faces, a place where history, culture, and politics intertwine in complicated ways. So, when I came across the news report about this cleric's threats, it wasn't just another headline to me. It was a call to reflect on the challenges we face as a nation. In a video that has since gone viral, the cleric's voice echoed through crowded mosques and online feeds, filled with a passion that bordered on anger. He warned that if Nigeria was not divided into separate entities, war would soon be declared. I could almost feel the weight of his words, heavy with bitterness and the scars of historical grievances. Listening to him, I couldn't help but remember that this wasn't the first time such sentiments had been expressed. A few months ago, another cleric had made similar claims, stirring up the air with talk of division and conflict. The recurring nature of these threats made it clear that there is a deep-seated frustration among certain groups, frustration that goes far beyond mere political differences. In this particular case, the cleric argued in a way that was both impassioned and incendiary. He spoke of how his people were being oppressed and how other ethnic groups were responsible for their suffering. His language was harsh, laced with insults and derogatory remarks aimed at those he saw as oppressors. Yet, even with such fiery rhetoric, there had been no intervention from security agencies like the Department of State Services or the police. This inaction left me wondering, what does it say about our society when such statements, which could potentially incite violence, are allowed to circulate freely? As I sat there pondering, I began to understand that this was more than just a rant from one man. It was a symptom of a much larger problem, a problem that has been brewing for decades. Nigeria's history is one of immense diversity and, unfortunately, deep division. Our borders, drawn during the colonial era, did not account for the complex tapestry of ethnic, cultural, and religious identities that thrive within our land. Some people argue that Nigeria was never meant to be a unified nation in the first place, that the idea of one Nigeria is merely a colonial construct designed for administrative convenience and resource exploitation. The cleric's call to divide the country, as extreme as it sounds, taps into this long-standing debate. His message suggests that the only way for every group to truly flourish is to have its own space, a separate nation where its identity can be celebrated without compromise. I have to admit, as I listened to his speech, I felt a pang of sympathy for those who feel marginalized. It's easy to understand the anger behind his words. Many Nigerians believe that the country is failing them, that corruption, insecurity, and the unchecked power of a few are leaving ordinary people in despair. In his passionate tirade, the cleric blamed these problems on the current system, arguing that the benefits of power and resources are hoarded by a small group of influential individuals, what he called the cabal. This term, laden with suspicion and bitterness, seemed to encapsulate the frustration of many who have seen their hopes dashed time and again by a system they perceive as rigged against them. Yet, even as I tried to see where he was coming from, I couldn't ignore the dangerous implications of his words. Threatening to declare war if Nigeria is not divided is not a call for constructive change, it's a call for chaos. War, as history has shown us time and again, brings nothing but suffering, loss, and long-lasting scars. I began to wonder about the real price of division. What would it mean for the families who have built their lives in communities that span what some might consider arbitrary borders? How would the future look if our nation were torn apart along ethnic lines? These questions haunted me, and I found myself wrestling with the idea that while the current system is deeply flawed, the solution proposed by the cleric might be even more destructive. In another part of the conversation, a critic pointed out that while many Nigerians are frustrated with the state of the country, the method of advocating for division through war and hatred is not the right approach. This critic argued that discussing Nigeria's division should not be criminalized if it is done in a measured and democratic way, perhaps through a referendum where every citizen has a say in the matter, rather than through the threat of violence. I found this argument compelling because it suggested that if people truly feel that the country is failing them, then they should have the right to express that opinion in a peaceful manner. It wasn't the idea of rethinking the structure of the nation that was the issue. It was the violent language and the call for war that raised red flags. I remember one afternoon a few weeks after hearing the news, I met with a group of friends at a small cafe in Lagos. The conversation quickly turned to the topic of national unity and the deep divisions that seemed to be growing by the day. One of my friends, who has always been politically active, remarked, "We're living in a country where people are so divided that even a call for war sounds like a solution." He went on to say that while many of us are disillusioned with the government and the status quo, the idea of splitting Nigeria into separate nations is both impractical and dangerous. We all agreed that if our country were divided, it wouldn't magically solve the problems of corruption or insecurity. It would only create new challenges, such as disputes over borders, resources, and governance. As the conversation continued, I found myself reflecting on the deeper roots of these divisions. Nigeria's history is a complicated one, marked by a colonial past that imposed artificial boundaries on communities with rich, diverse cultures. After independence, the nation struggled to create a cohesive identity, and the resulting tensions have continued to simmer beneath the surface. The cleric's remarks in many ways are a reminder of this troubled history, a history where the very notion of a unified Nigeria was imposed on a landscape that was far more complex than simple lines on a map. This perspective, though it may seem radical to some, is shared by others who believe that the current political structure is inherently flawed. They argue that the problems we face today are the legacy of decisions made long ago, decisions that continue to affect every aspect of our lives. In one of his more memorable passages, the cleric said something along the lines of, "Nigeria is not for us anymore. To survive, we must be divided." His voice, filled with a mix of anger and despair, left little room for nuance. It was a stark, black and white view of the nation's future. A future where each ethnic group would be confined to its own territory, fighting its own battles and managing its own resources. I couldn't help but think of the potential consequences of such a scenario. The division of a country, especially one as populous and diverse as Nigeria, would likely lead to a cascade of problems. It would disrupt families, communities, and economies that have long been interwoven. Moreover, it could set a precedent for other nations grappling with similar issues, potentially fueling a global trend toward fragmentation and isolationism. Despite the inflammatory nature of his speech, it's worth noting that not everyone who speaks about Nigeria's division is advocating for immediate conflict. Some believe that discussions about reconfiguring the nation's structure should be taken seriously, but that any decision must be reached through democratic means rather than through the threat of war. The idea of a referendum, a vote by the people on such a monumental question, has been floated by several critics as a more measured alternative. After all, if a significant portion of the population believes that the current system is untenable, shouldn't they have a say in how the country is organized? I found this line of reasoning to be much more appealing, if only because it leaves room for peaceful dialogue and compromise rather than resorting to violence. At the heart of the matter lies a question of identity and belonging. Many Nigerians feel caught between the promise of a united nation and the reality of long-standing ethnic, cultural, and religious differences. For some, the idea of dividing Nigeria into separate, self-governing regions represents a way to reclaim their heritage and assert their rights. For others, however, it threatens to undermine the sense of unity that, despite all odds, has allowed the country to survive and even thrive in the face of adversity. I've seen people from different parts of Nigeria come together during times of crisis, whether during natural disasters or political upheavals, and it reminds me that deep down there is a shared bond that transcends our differences. It's this bond that makes the idea of division so unsettling to many. The conversation about Nigeria's future isn't new. It's a debate that has been simmering for years, if not decades. The threats made by the cleric are just the latest chapter in a long story of struggle and negotiation over what it means to be Nigerian. I recall reading about similar sentiments in the past, when leaders and intellectuals debated whether the country's unity was a realistic goal or simply an ideal that could never be fully achieved. Over time, these discussions have evolved, sometimes taking the form of calls for reform, and sometimes, as in this case, calls for outright separation. The fact that such extreme views are gaining traction is both a symptom of deep-seated frustrations and a sign that many Nigerians feel that the current system is failing them. In my quiet moments of reflection, I think about the families who might be torn apart if such divisions were to become a reality. I imagine the pain of grandparents who have seen their children and grandchildren suffer through conflict, the anxiety of parents who worry about the future their children will inherit, and the despair of communities that have long dreamed of a better life. War and division are not abstract concepts. They are real, tangible threats that could shatter lives and destroy hopes. And yet, despite this potential for immense suffering, voices like that of the cleric continue to rise. They serve as a reminder that when people feel unheard and marginalized, they may resort to extreme measures to demand change, even if those measures come at a high cost. I remember one particular moment when I was discussing these issues with an elderly neighbor. She told me, in a soft yet firm voice, that Nigeria was a house of many rooms, where every family had its own story, but all were part of the same home. Her words resonated deeply with me because they captured the essence of what it means to belong to a nation that is both diverse and united. She explained that that while it was natural for different groups to have their own identities and traditions, it was equally important to recognize that these differences could be a source of strength if embraced properly. To her, the idea of dividing Nigeria was like tearing apart a family that had, over generations, learned to live together despite its many disagreements. It was a perspective that, in its quiet wisdom, stood in stark contrast to the loud, confrontational rhetoric of those who call for division. As I continued to mull over these thoughts, I realized that this is a moment for deep introspection, a time to ask ourselves what kind of future we truly want. Is the answer to our problems a violent split that might bring temporary satisfaction to some, but leave behind a legacy of conflict for future generations? Or is there a more constructive path forward, one that acknowledges our grievances without resorting to war? I believe that the challenges we face are not insurmountable, provided we are willing to engage in honest dialogue and make the tough choices required for real change.
Da muke kira don girman Allah a raba Najeriya. Don girman Allah a taimake mu a raba Najeriya. Mu ina magana da yawun musulmi kuma ina magana da yawun 'yan arewa. Mu a matsayinmu na musulmi ba mu da bukatar zama da inyamurai. Ba mu da bukatar zama da inyamurai.
On today's video, I'm bringing to you another Islamic cleric who is also calling for the division of Nigeria in a derogatory manner. Now, reminding you that before now, about 3 months ago or 2 months thereabout, there was a cleric who came in the mosque and started talking and defamed him when he was saying that if Nigeria is not divided, that they will declare war, that there will be a declaration of war, that they just want Nigeria to be divided. And up till now, have you ever maybe hear that DSS invited him or police arrested him? Absolutely no. There is nothing of such that happens. But he threatens everybody, said he's going to declare war. He called people bastard. He called people all sort of names, used derogatory statement. That is not enough. Recently, there is another Islamic cleric that people famed when he was still talking. Now, there are a lot of people who are saying this in the northern Nigeria, a lot of clerics. What about people who they did not fame? Now, this video you're about to watch, this Islamic cleric is also calling for the division of Nigeria. He even went to say that they don't want to live with Igbos anymore, that Igbos are killing their people. All those things are false accusations leveled against other ethnic nationalities. Now, let's come to the reality. Calling for the division of Nigeria is not a crime, okay? Depending on the way you are doing it. Anybody who says that they want Nigeria to be divided is not a crime. The average Nigerian knows that this nation is heading to doom, heading to destruction. The average Nigerian knows that this country is not working. Absolutely, it's not working. Okay? But the issue is there are people who are benefiting from the corruption. People are benefiting from the insecurity. People are benefiting even from the death of people. People are benefiting from everything bad happening. And these people are few people I would refer to as the cabal who are standing for the neo-colonists. And these people don't want Nigeria to divide. They don't want even to hear anything referendum. They don't want to hear anything at all. But the Islamic clerics calling for the division of Nigeria, the way they are doing it, they are just going after the declaration of war. Let's take a listen to what this man said.
Da muke kira don girman Allah a raba Najeriya. Don girman Allah a taimake mu a raba Najeriya. Mu ina magana da yawun musulmi kuma ina magana da yawun 'yan arewa. Mu a matsayinmu na musulmi ba mu da bukatar zama da inyamurai. Ba mu da bukatar zama da inyamurai. Ibo ba abokin zama bane, ba mutanen arziki bane. Bare in ba ku misalai kaɗan don mu wuce. Ka duba ka ga yadda mutanen da suke arziki a ƙasanmu. Na yi magana ce wani hate speech, ko ba ka ke cewa ba wai hate speech. Ai mu speech ɗin kawai muke yi, su kashe mu suke yi. Kwanan nan aka kama Ibo yana yin muryar Fulani yake yi, yana kashe mutane da sunan Fulani. Ba mu ba, Takumbu Asari ya fito ya ce babu wani bafulatani da yake kashe mutane a ƙasar Ibo. Ƙarya ake, me yasa su Fulanin ba su kashe su ba? me yasa kadai kasar Ibo suke kashewa? Ba gaskiya bane, wannan wani sharri ne, in ji shi fa, wani sharri ne da Ibo suka kulla. Ba mutumin da yake da greediness, tsabagen son zuciya kamar Ibo. Duk inda ka zauna da shi sai dai ya cuce ka kafin ku zauna lafiya. Wannan yasa ba mu da bukatar zama da su. Sun cika Kano, sun cika Katsina, ga su a Sokoto, sun cika Abuja, ga su a Naija, ko ina Ibo sun cika, amma su ba ka zama garin su ka zauna lafiya. Mun yi wannan kalubale kuma muna ƙara yi, a gwada mana wata kasuwa guda ɗaya wadda aka gina a ƙasashen jihohin Ibo, wanda musulmi ɗaya ke da shago, wanda ɗan arewa ɗaya ke da shago. Idan akwai a nuna mana. Muna son a nuna mana wani musulmi ɗan arewa da yake zaune a ƙasar Ibo yana zaune lafiya, a nuna mana shi. Kenan babu. Waɗannan mutane menene amfanin zama da su? Muna kira ga gwamnati a yi tsarin da za a yi don Allah a raba mu da Ibo, a raba mu da Inyamurai, su kama gabansu, mu kama gabanmu, a zauna lafiya. Irin wannan kisa da suke mana, kisan gilla, a nuna mana yaran mu kwance cikin jini, muna cewa mabiya su yi haƙuri. Wallahi akwai radda za mu sako su mu ce ku koya musu hankali. Ƙasar ta daɗe ba ta watse ba. Idan ku gwamnati ne sai ku gwada mana a ranar ku gwamnati ne. Kenan akan mu kuke gwada ku gwamnati ne. Wai ana cewa unknown gunmen sunansu kenan. 'Yan bindigar da ba a san su ba. Wallahi mu ma muna iya ƙirƙiran 'yan bindigar da ba a san su ba. Domin me? Abin da aka ce karen bana maganin zoman bana, to kaji haka karatun yake. Wannan abin da ake yi ana sane, gwamnonin Ibo, gwamnonin jihohin Ibo suna sane, da gangan suke bari ana kashe mutanenmu, da gangan suke bari, suna sane. Duk wanda ya ce ba sani ba ƙarya yake yi, sun sani. Gwamnatin tarayya tsoron su kuke ji ko yaya ne? Idan faranmu ya ɓaci, al'amura za su ɓaci, kuma dole mu ga mu gaskiya. Ku kuma 'yan arewa, musamman manyan arewa waɗanda suke fama da mugun munafurci, wai mutum bai san Allah bane ar-Razzaku, wai idan an rabu ba mu da man fetur. Man fetur ɗin me? Menene ko man fetur? Ana magana imani, kana magana man fetur, saboda kai baka san Allah ba. Mu ɗauka ma ba mu da man fetur, sai me? Su kawo man fetur su saida mana, mu saida musu akuya, mu saida musu bunsuru, mu saida musu rago, mu saida musu shanu, mu saida musu masara, mu saida musu wake. Ciniki ba haramun bane. Idan Inyamuri zai shigo yankin mu sai yayi biza, idan muka kama shi ba biza mun nakaɗa mai dan uban kashi. Wallahi haka za a yi. Ba mu da buƙatar zama da Inyamurai, kuma ko kun kira mu so 10 kun ja kunnan mu, haka za mu gaya muku. Na san kuna jina. Mu ba mu buƙatar zama da Inyamurai. Muna fatan a raba Najeriya, kowa ikama gefensa. Ba mu buƙatar zama da Inyamurai. Idan ko ba haka ba, ku tsawata musu akan kashe mutanenmu. Wallahi za mu ɗauki mataki. Amma wallahi ba za a ci gaba haka ba. Yanzu nan bayanin da ake mana a majalisar limamai, a nan Lafai ta jihar Naija, Lafai ina ce? Tsakiya arewa ce. Aka samu Inyamuri ya kama yarinya musulma, ya kai ta ɗaki kwana 3, ya kwalkwala idanunta, ya kwalkwala farjinta, ya ainihin kashe ta, yanke hannunta. Ya jama'a, yanzu don Allah, idan aka samu bahaushe ɗaya ko musulmi ɗaya a ƙasar Ibo ya kama ɗiyarsu, ya yanke mata idanu, ya mata ta'addanci, ya kuke ganin za a ƙare?
Yes, of course. Nigeria is not for Igbo man. Okay, Nigeria is not for Igbo man. According to Showore, for Igbo man to succeed in Nigeria, Nigeria must be divided.
For an Igbo man to survive in Nigeria, as it is currently put together, Nigeria must break.
I do not see something too bad in what these men are saying, but I see the way they are saying it with hatred and animosity. So, in my own opinion, the best thing Tinubu could do for Nigeria is to make sure he did not leave Nigeria the way he found it. He should make sure that he brings policies that will divide this country. He should make sure that he conducts a referendum. He should make sure he uses his power to disintegrate Nigeria. Because this is the same man who told us that he don't believe in one Nigeria. We are all pretending. Now, I do not blame the North because they are the first people who wanted to leave Nigeria. But they were convinced by the Britain that if you leave Nigeria, you will lose. Why can't you stay? We make sure that power will always come to your hand, and through the power, you will also share the resources in the South. But now, every ethnic nationality in Nigeria can survive well as a good country. The North has a lot of natural resources, both gold, lithium, or they have it. The West, they have it. The East, they have it. The South, they have it. The Middle Belt, they have it. Every, NATO ethnic nationality in Nigeria can survive as a nation. Don't let anybody deceive you about that. We have what it takes to survive a nation, even though the country will be divided into 20. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear this, but that is where everything is heading to. In a nation where people are being killed every day, where people are being kidnapped, and the people who seems to be the mastermind of all these things is still telling you that they want Nigeria to divide, the government should better listen, to them. The government should better listen to these people. Everybody wants this country to divide. Nobody wants to remain in one country. Nobody. Because if not because of Nigeria, how can a foreigner come to my village and prevent people not to go to farm for 2 years? Foreigner, just invaders. Because if I lay hand in AK-47 now, the nation will come against me. But if it is our own country, we know how to arm people. This is not our country. If it is our country, we know how to secure it. But you can't do anything because the Abuja, the presidency is against the people. We must return to our root, the way we were before Nigeria was amalgamated. Nigeria was a Royal Niger company. If I try to bring people to the history of the past, they don't still understand the way I feel about it. Because when you are doing anything, you do it with a purpose. Now, this book now, avoid your excuse and get your results. This book was written for a purpose. Maybe, okay, you buy a phone. Either you buy the phone to make up. There is a purpose why you do that, okay? Now, the question I'm asking people is that what is the purpose? Why Nigeria was named Nigeria? What is the purpose of the amalgamation? Go and read your history. The purpose of the amalgamation is not to form a country. They did not amalgamate Nigeria to form a country. They amalgamated Nigeria so that the rulership of the conquered people will be easy, so that it will be easier for them to administrate, to impoverish people, to gather their resources just for the benefit of the Great Britain. And someone is here telling you that Nigeria is one, is indivisible, Nigeria unity is not negotiable. They are telling you that their loot is not negotiable. They are telling you that the benefit they are gaining from insecurity is not negotiable. Anybody telling you Nigeria is not negotiable, the person is an evil. It's an evil in the sense that the person is not looking at the life that people are losing every day, but the person is looking at his business, looking at the population. Come on, I think I can get more people. Nigeria is okay for me to achieve my dream. He's not looking at the dreams of people who are dying. Selfish and wicked people. That is the people we have in Nigeria. Anyway, I leave my case. This man is not the first person that is calling for war or for division of Nigeria. The first video that the man was calling Arabaka, that they want to declare if they did not, divide Nigeria, also seconded. Anyway, we are documenting it. We are listening. We don't judge on time.
Kasan nan ta rubu. Araba ta kawai. Wallahi. A ra'ayina da masu ra'ayi irin nawa, kasan nan ta rubu. Araba ta kawai. Araba ta Oduduwa su dauki nasu, Biyabara su dauki nasu, mu musulmi mu dauki namu. Wallahi wannan shine solution. Araba ta, araba kasan, wannan shine ra'ayin mu, araba ta. Su ci man su umma mai din ne. A bar mu da shanun mu, a bar mu da waken mu, a bar mu da gyadan mu, a bar mu da shinkafan mu, a bar mu da dawon mu, a bar mu da geron mu. Ku je ku ci fetur din. Ku je ku ci. Araba kasar. Mu samu mu dabbaka shari'a musulunci. Ba wata shegiya Ngozi ko Dabora da za ta zo ta fi tsirara suke rabin mamanta a waje ta bata tarbiyyar ƴaƴanmu, ta bata, ba shegin da ta yi haka da sunan constitution ya bada right. Babu wannan. A rabu kawai, wallahi rabuwan ƙasa ne shine alheri ga musulunci, ga musulmai. Wallahi tallahi shine. Kuma shine munafukan cikin mu da su ƙara bayyana mu gano su. Ko kudu ko arewa. Allah ya raba ta. domin ba za mu yarda ana kashe mana 'yan uwan musulmi ba, mu kuma su suna zaune a nan lafiya, ba zai yi ba. Gwamnati ki ta kinnot, ba za mu yarda ba za mu yadda a kashe mutane musu suna zaune a lafiya suna ɗebe matattalin arzikin ƙasa ba za mu yadda ba wannan ba. An fa zo wajen red line, ba za mu yadda da wannan ba, shine gaskiyar magana, ba za mu yadda ba. Yawwa, ko da a yi stopping ko kuma a yi yaƙi, wannan shine gaskiyar magana. Wallahi.
This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.